But let me just start off with this. First of all, what's your point of view? Should this be something that the U.S. does? By the way, we've done it before.
Aaron, we should. That's a capability the United States has, and it should be kept in the discussion as an option to go after folks like this. And individuals, again, the discussion becomes very legal, whether they're a U.S. citizen or not, and where they're located and what their activities are. So you get into the discussion of the levels of detail in terms of intelligence. But the short answer is yes. It needs to remain in the discussion as a capability to be used.
All right. So the president, in that big speech he made about drones, it was kind of a lot of pomp and circumstance and then nothing since. So he said killing an American with a drone strike is unconstitutional without due process. But he did justify drone strikes. And let me just ask you, because you've been in the room when decisions are made on whether to strike somebody, right? And tell me who's in the room. There's lawyers in the room. I mean, how does that qualify as satisfying due process?
Well, the definition of due process has to be provided by a lawyer, but having been involved in discussions on the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and in terms of their capabilities to strike or not to strike, there's always legal representation in the room and the operational commander at various levels that makes the go, no-go decision. So the lawyers are talking to not only the intel guys, but also the guys that ultimately give the decision on pulling the trigger. So there is a legal determination. And wrapped around all of this, Aaron, is a discussion of collateral damage. That is, who else is potentially going to be damaged or hurt as a result of this discussion
well,
or this strike?
There's also the fact, and people have laughed at this point, but to me it's very important. That is, if you're going to have a conversation about whether it's okay to kill an American who happens to be overseas, who's plotting attacks against America, suppose that person was sitting in Des Moines or in Washington, D.C. All of a sudden people go, oh, well, that would be ridiculous. We would never do it. Intellectually, it's the same person plotting the same thing. If we would kill them with a drone overseas, it would only be intellectually consistent to be willing to do it on American soil.
My answer to that is why not? You're exactly correct. In fact, go back to 1996 with Timothy McVeigh and the Murrah building in Oklahoma City and the great tragedy that occurred in that. Let's assume for a second that drone technology existed. It did not in sufficient precision and detail back then, but let's assume intelligence was known about McVeigh. His rental truck was en route to the Murrah building. We knew and positively identified that he was in the vehicle. It was ready to explode, and it was moving in the direction of the Murrah building. Why wouldn't we have used a drone to go after that thing instead of putting a bunch of law enforcement folks at risk to stop that building? To stop that vehicle.
Right.
It would have made perfect sense to use a drone.
Out in front of all of us, and I've mentioned this years ago, I've mentioned it previously, and it's so important. It's the Overton window, and there's other psychological schools of thought that say the same thing. The communists talked about this. Lenin talked about freezing and unfreezing society. Create enough crisis, enough fear, unfreeze the status quo. When it's liquefied, they can remold it like wet clay in the image they want, and then freeze it again. We are in an unfrozen mode right now as they bring in the tyranny. But in that open window, we can strike back, and we are. Now, another way to see it is the Overton window. The Overton window is a political theory described as a window in a range of public reactions to ideas in public discourse and a spectrum of all possible opinions on a particular issue. It is named after its originator, Joseph P. Overton, former vice president of the McCannick Center for Public Policy, and it goes on. At any given moment, the window includes a range of policies considered to be politically acceptable in the current climate of public opinion, which a politician can recommend without being considered too extreme or outside of the mainstream to gain or keep public office. Overton arranged the spectrum on a vertical axis of more free or less free in regards to government intervention. When the window moves or expands, ideas or accordingly become more or less politically acceptable. The degrees of acceptance of public ideas can be described roughly: unthinkable, radical, acceptable, sensible, popular, policy. Well, now they've taught children in school not to have opinions, not to judge cultures like Aztecs bad, Nazis bad, communists bad, Renaissance good. So people can't judge. Then they come in, though, and say, but you've got to follow our moral dictates. Save the earth. You're bad. Kill yourself. Death education. The world without humans. The planet after humans. All these TV shows. All these movies. Apocalyptic doom coming. Everyone dead. Getting you ready so that you accept it as everyone's dying around you from the bioweapon they will release. I believe bioweapons the way they're going to go. There'll be beta tests ahead of it. At least a lot of you servants of evil, when you're being killed by this, if we don't turn this around, at least when it's happening, finally you'll wake up and get right with God. And that's what matters at the end of it. And some people will survive and dig in. And then you'll fully know when the government's flying around in its drones saying, come out, we want to help you, the plague is over. You'll know that's the enemy. A lot of you'll still come out, though, even when that happens. But it doesn't matter. You'll be watching this transmission later, and I'm speaking to you in the future. And that's what matters. We can beat these people.